Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. Today, I have with me two very special guests. First of all, I have returning alumni of the podcast guest, H.L. Tinsley. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah. Anytime, anytime. And you brought a friend, so B.A. Bellec, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Anytime anybody wants to bring a friend or hop on, I am more than willing to have multiple people on. This has been my goal for quite some time. Schedules were kind of hard, the last couple of seasons and stuff like that. So anytime I can get multiple authors on, that have worked on a project together, that excites me because I haven't gotten to do that yet. So that allows me to pick your writers' brains, a lot more. And having written a couple of anthology stories, but having them be closed down because of the pandemic, I'm actually really interested in getting some out there. I know some people who've been listening to the podcast for a while have asked me certain questions in the podcast group, stuff like that. So Holly, when you messaged me, I was like, actually, this is like perfect timing because I was trying to find a group, or at least a few authors that I could talk to about their anthology. So this worked out perfectly. So thank you so much for, messaging me and both of you guys coming on today. So. And we'll actually start with that first question. And I'm always interested when it comes to, authors for an anthology. And I'm curious at how you guys decided upon your theme.
I'll start us off because I think that was probably mostly my fault. In terms of like coming up with a theme, it actually started originally with myself and author P.L. Stewart were talking just randomly one day. I can't even remember where the conversation started, but he kind of floated this idea of saying, "Oh, wouldn't it be great to do an anthology? We both know so many deep, really good authors. We know
Yeah.
so many different writers. This would be a really fun, easy project to put together." And we kind of chatted back and forth for like a couple of weeks about it. And we thought, do you know what? We'll just put some feelers out there to a couple of authors, see what people say. Really didn't expect anyone to come back to us. And pretty much everyone we contacted within like maybe a day came back and said, we're in.
Wow.
So myself and PL just kind of thought, okay, this is actually happening now. We need to think about what we're doing. So we discussed genres and themes and kind of topics and things like that. And we came up with this idea of merging horror and fantasy because both of us had kind of done work in that realm. So we wanted to do something that was really a gateway between the two. And then the idea of the body was just something that came up in conversation. I don't even remember where it came from, but we thought, that sounds cool, so we'll jump on that. And we kind of pitched it to all the authors and everybody got on board with it.
Oh, that's super cool. I gotta say, when you're like, oh, everybody responded right away, like that's amazing because I think ours was like the two I was supposed to be in. I actually I pulled a story actually because then I had a better idea and I was like worried about copywriting and nobody really had the copywriting answer for our particular anthology. Now I'm glad I did because it's gonna be part of my Kindle Vella series. But yeah, I mean, but that was another thing is it took a long time for people, to respond. So I'm more of a I don't like to I like to work with people, but I want it to be a little bit more organized. So I'm glad that people responded to you so quickly. So to me, it just sounds like having been in that situation and being a little bit not on board with the overall process that, the people that were leading it, we're kind of going for. I'm more of an organized person and I really like deadlines and things like that. And I like some direction. So it sounds like you guys had my type of anthology and how I like it ran. So that to me sounds really awesome. But I just want to point out to the audience that, sometimes, different groups, it is hard when you get a lot of people together. It's like a group project for school or something like that, right? So, but it's interesting, right? When you can try and come up with that common vision, but still allow that theme, allow people to write in it, with their story in terms of the anthology from their point. So I think it's really hard though sometimes to find a theme. So your guys's was really cool. I love the, that concept, the anatomy of fear. And I don't know, it just sounds cool and it sounds very that kind of just the word anatomy alone, when you mix it with fear, I think, really displays a really cool type of imagery. And I think really match your guys' theme right away. So, I teach that to kids all the time, in terms of design and, English and social studies, things like that. And it's really hard, I think, to match those. So I think you guys did a really good job there. But I was just curious that, like what sort of structure you guys use, to try and keep people on schedule or on track. How did you guys have like a Discord, or did you guys just use email? Did you guys Zoom? That's the next question I have, is just like, how did you guys keep track of different people's ideas, the schedule, and kind of like the pace of the project?
I'm gonna let Brian go on that one because I got it from the one side, Brian got it from the other. So
How's
Yeah.
the front end
So-
person?
we definitely had a big group chat going pretty quick into the project. And I remember very early, one of the days that was most stressful for me early on was when we picked our body parts. And so there was this early situation where we had all got together, we were all chatting, but nobody had formally selected their body part on our Discord chat box. And that day when we were assigning body parts, there was a lot of nervous energy, like, is anybody going to pick my body part and that? But most of it was through the Discord. We had a lot of pods. So like I loved our beta strategy. We busted our group into little pods, and then we kind of worked in our pod for the first 2 or 3 months. And that was brilliant, and it really did work. And it's ambitious to try to beta read all the stories, but by putting it in the pods and only betaing in your group, it really worked out well for developing the stories. Yeah.
I'm like kicking myself because that's a terrific idea. I have not heard anybody say yet, which just sounds awesome. Do you mind just explaining that a little bit further, just for our audience in terms of the Anatomy of Fear? So did you guys each have a particular body part, and kind of was that like part of your theme, or like how did that work like in terms of your guys' stories?
So at the start of it, we all it was a total, everybody could pick anything they wanted, and then we were going to see if there was overlap, like too many people too close into the body, like, well, you can't have 5 people on the legs. Right. But once we got through that first couple days, it became pretty clear we had a pretty good mix of different body parts, and some of the ideas, the brainstorming early on was a bit generic. So I was like, well, I could apply actually different body parts to my story maybe. So if we want to rebrand this story to fit a different body part, that'll work. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. That's super cool.
Yeah.
Well, do you mind if I ask like what body parts you guys, happen to be writing in for your stories without giving anything away? Like if it's like the tale of the telltale heart and you can't say heart, like don't feel free. But
I'll let Holly go first. Yeah.
It's fine. So I did neck for my story.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
and
I
asking
had
so many questions right now. I have to read this now. I have so many questions. Like I need to, I'm that person that needs to know things. Like, so now I need to know. What did you say, Brian? Which one did you pick?
I said I did toes, and it was actually, I had written my story before I had formally gotten the toes. So
cool.
PL Stewart asked me to do this, and I wrote my story the next day, actually, the first draft.
Oh, wow.
So I got way ahead of the project.
Yeah,
and then I was like, oh, I hope I actually get toes. So it worked out though.
It was kind of crazy because we'd literally just put this, like, I think we put the chat group together like on like the Sunday night or something like that, and I was like, okay, so if everyone can get their stories back, by like say the end of the month, and then I literally woke up the next morning and there was an email from Brian with just like, here's my story, it's done.
That's awesome. As a teacher, I wish that would happen to me all the time.
I know, it's awesome.
I'd get a lot more writing done, let me tell you. It would make my job a lot easier. Well, that's awesome. How authors did you guys have total for the anthology now?
So 12 in total. So we initially we made a list of 12, but then we also had a list of about 10 like backup authors. Not that they weren't equally as good, but we just happened to go out to 12 first. We kind of thought we'd get a few people saying no, we don't want to, or we don't have the time, and like all 12 of the first 12 that we approached came back and said yes straight away, which was awesome.
Yeah, that's unheard of. Like that's pretty awesome. The two I was like gonna like writing for originally, like it was like, oh my gosh, I think it was like 32 for the first one. I think we only got 10 back, and then the second one I think was right around 12, but again it was like 32, I think, so 36 were invitations. So that's an amazing like percentage right there. That's really awesome. So how many body parts did you guys end up with then, if you guys had 12 authors?
So we actually managed to find a different body part for all the authors, surprisingly.
Wow.
I mean, we did at one point think we might have to go left leg, right leg, But no, we have 12 individual body parts for 12 individual stories.
Oh, that is really cool. That is so interesting. I just like that because it's just funny because I'm just things are sometimes serendipitous when I'm interviewing people, and like I said, I was looking for an anthology group, and some authors to interview. But it's funny because we're going over that right now, like in terms of some of my design classes with theme. So that's just like such a cool, example for me to use, like real world example, in terms of like how a theme is overarching, and used throughout an entire product, particularly like a book. So that's like really super cool. I was curious, you guys talked, about some of your successes. What were some of the pitfalls, just starting out with those that like, what were some things that you guys struggled with, in terms of, just the anthology or maybe your individual stories, things like that?
I mean, I think it'd be very different for both of us because obviously I probably found more pitfalls in the production side of it. Whereas obviously Brian was kind of working with the other authors, doing the beta reading, doing the stories. I think for me, the biggest challenge was definitely the artwork. So through the course of the project, we went through 6 different artists.
Wow.
We went out to a couple and we got really great starts from them. So we'd have concept art back, and then just through sheer acts of fate, things happened where they couldn't carry on with the project, and we got to the point where we were pretty much 90% of the way there and we still didn't have an artist.
Wow.
So I kind of last ditch attempt, like just panic messaged every artist that I could find that would fit the style we wanted.
Yeah.
Unfortunately we found a lady called BjØrn Larssen who came on board really late in the process and just absolutely smashed it out of the water. She was really great, really open. So she kind of worked with us to make sure she got what the authors wanted from their images. So they kind of got a base image that was like a starting point where they could then make amendments and changes. And she was just really, happy to facilitate the whole process. She was just awesome.
Oh, that's cool. I just was curious, like, is she the same one that did your guys' cover for the anthology as well?
No, I've never worked with her before, but she is doing my next book cover for me.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's super cool. So in terms of like images, did you guys each get one like in terms of like the start of the chapter, or I was just curious about those?
We did indeed, which I can show you if
Oh,
I can
cool.
find. I'm just trying to find like mine or Brian's, but I can't find them. But there we go. So, I don't know if you guys can see that. So
Oh
that's
yeah, wow, that looks
Brian's
terrific.
one.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so there is one for every single author. They've all got their own kind of individual
Oh,
one.
that's cool.
Yeah, so that one's the one for Nick.
Oh, that's really cool.
I won't show you all 12, but yeah, they are all
No, yeah,
really
yeah, yeah.
cool.
Well, I just was curious, just for, like, and because a lot of people, like I said, have been asking me about anthologies, and I was like, well, I was trying to do too, but it just didn't work out. And then I had another one for production schedule and stuff. When I was writing my fantasy novel for my first draft, and so I was like, well, I'm gonna ask about certain formatting things. So I think that's a really good one, because there's so many different ways that people, have done their anthologies, and I've seen some really cool ones. But I just think, showing how you guys have done yours, I think really helps because I do like that because I was reading one a while back and I just totally like things. I've read way too many books to review recently. We're doing a review soon, people. Stay tuned. But like I was reading one and it was cool. It was I also had read like a Forgotten Realms one and like another one, but it was cool with the indie one I read because they did the same thing you guys did, where they had each author, it was 15, had one image at the start of their chapter. And I gotta say, as a reader, like that like really helped kind of set the mood and the theme for that author and their story, and, instead of just giving me some like just the title, you know what I mean? It gave me something to look at, think about. And I got to say, compared to other anthologies that I was reading that didn't do that, I really feel like the image really helped me, and just kind of set the tone. So I think it's cool that you guys did that because that's something that I'm actually looking for now, in terms of anthologies that I'm reading. And in the future, when I take part in them, I definitely would love to get people on board and get an artist to do what you guys did because again, I really think it enhanced the anthology and the experience. So that's super
Yeah.
cool. Um, so did you guys just give her like a basic concept and then she kind of went from there? And then you guys kind of were able to tweak your individual one. Is that kind of how the process went, or?
I'll talk about mine specifically. So with my
Yeah.
toes, the first draft that we had, it wasn't exactly what I had in mind. I actually was aiming for a moment in my story, kind of. And so we did through, I think we did three kind of revisions on it to get to the final that's in the printed copy. And so it wasn't instantaneous, but I know some of the first drafts, because we were all posting them in the group chat, and some of them were amazing right away, just instant hit, like perfect,
Yeah.
nailed it. And then with mine, I was like, oh, I want to tweak this and I want to do that. And yeah, mine wasn't instant. So it took
Oh, yeah.
2 weeks maybe to get mine done, but that's not
Okay.
that long when you're working on art. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that you bring up another question that actually I never even thought of to ask in terms of that process. Did you guys like if like for yours, Brian, you're like, okay, yeah, I like this and that. Did you guys, kind of vote on the final together, or is it more just each individual author got to pick their own concept?
Individual had the final approval, but if you had questions, you were posting in the chat, like, what do you think about
Yeah.
XYZ or something? Yeah.
Oh, that's super cool. I just think
Yeah.
that's a really good way to do it because again, I think you get like more each author gets more of a personal stake, for their story, and they're part of the anthology. And I have noticed that, in terms of different authors I've talked to, they're like who either did or didn't like their, working with their group for anthologies. Like Lee Conley and I talked about that in one he was in recently, just like, on Facebook and stuff. But
It wasn't
he
this one,
really
was
liked the
it?
group. Was it? Is Lee with you guys? I
He's
didn't
Yeah.
think
yeah.
so. I think it was. Oh, I don't know if he was. I don't know actually because I might have just missed it. But no, he was saying like, oh, it was really great, and I was like, oh, that's really cool because he had mentioned something in the Facebook group about it. He was like, yeah, I'm part of this anthology. That's really funny. Maybe he was. I don't know. He had good things to
Maybe.
say, so that's really funny.
That's good.
Him and I have been circling each other for a while. It's just like every time he's got time, but it's like horrible for me and vice versa. But that's really funny that yeah, maybe he was, unless he's part of two, but that's really funny. But he was just saying, like somebody had mentioned like they were going to be part of an anthology and kind of some of the same problems that I had. And I didn't want to be negative Nancy. So I was kind of staying out of it, as like the admin and stuff. And then Lee popped in with some positives for his current anthology, which I assume is you guys. And we kind of talked a little bit with, the couple people that posted and asked the questions, just in terms of trying to work with different authors. And I have Clayton coming on soon, Snyder and Michael R. Fletcher at some point, within the next couple of months, talking about their newest book that they co-authored, and some of their future projects, and I've talked to each of them separately, but it's always interesting, I think, to just get people's processes down, because it's so hard, I think, because we're normally writing by ourselves, and then when you're, with other people, I think sometimes, we struggle a little bit. But did you guys find that, your group chat and everybody seemed to work pretty well together and, things went pretty smoothly or?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, there's no egos in this group at all.
Oh,
I
that's
mean,
awesome.
we went out to these authors, and these are all people who have won awards and been in like SBFBOs and kind of kind of well-known names throughout different communities in the book world. So I was genuinely myself a little bit intimidated reaching out to some of these people. I thought they're just going to be like, no, who are you?
Got a pretty
But
good list, yeah.
everyone came in and everyone was just from the get-go was willing to help each other out and be supportive, but also from my point of view to be really responsive to like the briefs that were given. And we just straight away found a really great balance between the authors having the freedom to use their voices and bring their personality to the project, but also us keeping things cohesive as a group and everybody going, okay, we're going to agree what the end goal is.
No, I think that makes total sense. It's just funny because I'm looking at when I was looking at the list ahead of time that you sent me, I was like, dang, there's some really awesome names on here. So I just was kind of curious, like Sean's been on before, Ella MacRae's been on here before, you've been on here before. So I was like, Krystle's been on. I was like, this is a really good group. I've talked to Zamil quite a bit, Trudie, Lee all the time. Tim's always in and out of the podcast group. Jacob and I are Instagram friends, talk here and there on different stuff. So yeah, you guys got a really good group here, I have to say. So I was just curious about how that worked. And I just want to say to the audience, if you had an experience like me, where I had a friend had two chiropractic experiences that did not go well. And it was his third chiropractor that really helped him, and I kind of felt that way a while back when I had talked to a couple people, about anthologies. I got kind of turned off after a while, but then, with doing this podcast, I realized, oh, it's actually not anthologies I'm having trouble with. It's I just haven't necessarily found the right group yet. So I just wanted to point that out to our audience. If you find a good group like your guys's, where you can do X, Y, and Z together, and it was really efficient. That's really awesome. But don't quit. You might just have to find, like the right group of people that fit for you. I'm just curious, did you guys talk at all about possibly doing another anthology in the future, since it seemed like, it went pretty well for you guys? I was just curious.
I mean, we haven't had that conversation yet.
So
Interesting.
I'll give you some 2 cents from behind the scenes, though. So one of the reasons I agreed to do this so quickly is because I wanted to do my own anthology spin-off idea for my series Pulse. And so I took this as a learning opportunity to get the ropes on how to put together a group and administer the group and do all the back end stuff.
Yeah,
Because in the future, I want to do the same project again for my idea. So yeah, I was in quick and I had a goal besides just writing my story.
It's all coming out now. Secret agenda.
Yeah. As soon as you said 2 cents behind the scenes, I was like, this is going to be a good answer right here. No, but I think that makes sense though, and I have tried to explain that to a lot of my students recently. I'm like, I had to really, to do certain things I want to do, in terms of this profession, I've had to really put myself out there and talk to different people and do different things. And even though I didn't have a story written, for anthology, at least being part of the process, I learned what I did and didn't like. I also learned, like you said, Brian, if I did want to run one, I learned what does not work for me, which sometimes is half the battle, and as authors, I feel like we do that a lot, like did this resource work for me? Did this way of writing, did this POV, whatever, it's like we're just constantly figuring out what does and doesn't work for us. So I think personally, like, with your goal, I think that makes total sense. But I think it also makes sense that you just got in there, and did the thing, because sometimes that's really the only way that you can learn how to do something. But yeah, I think that makes total sense. Well, that's really cool. I was curious about your guys' cover. So as soon as you sent it to me, Holly, I was like, that is really cool. So I was just curious on how that came about. Because it's such a unique design. I love seeing all you guys' names there too, in terms of like, the title in red and then everybody's names at the bottom. I really like how you guys, if you guys are on anywhere, just click on the description, you'll get to see this amazing cover. But as a design teacher, I'm like, that is really cool. And again, when you're talking about theme, I feel like it matches your guys' theme really well and really encompasses, all of your stories, which sometimes with an anthology, is really difficult to do. So I was just curious how you guys, decided that this was going to be the cover and kind of what that process was like.
Well, we actually started out with quite a similar concept cover really early on when we first started talking about the project. And the one thing that we all kind of agreed in the first stages was because the theme was the body, we wanted the illustrations to like evoke a kind of tattoo style. So like something you can imagine people like having as like tattoos or like obviously t-shirts.
Awesome t-shirt.
And I think what worked really well was when we, not just with the cover, but with the author's individual art as well, is we went out and we said to all the authors, right, we need everyone to put together like a little mini brief with like, what are the key words from your stories? Like, what are the main themes and motifs? What's important to you? And then Dawn was able to take each person's story and kind of work that in. So like, even on the cover, there's like little bits and bobs. So like we've got the little kind of pentagram symbol there.
Yeah, that just stands out.
Yeah, so that's for one of the stories. I'm not going to spoiler it, but you can really find out. So we've got the bird motif, we've got the multicolored eyeglass. So they're all kind of little hints and like spoilers to like what's in the stories. So that was really kind of important to incorporate.
Sorry, I reacted that way. The paperback looks so much cooler than just the Kindle version. And usually they look pretty similar, but that looks like amazing. That is really cool.
So that one is our Kickstarter exclusive cover. So
that's awesome.
The general release cover is the same design, but it's in red, and it's got kind of a more black and white motif.
Oh, that's cool. Well, that's good to know. Writing that down. I had to actually add the app the other day, after our initial talk, because I had somebody else do something very similar. And I was like, oh, that's just so cool. And my wife's like, I guess you can buy paperbacks again. You've only bought 5 in the last year. I was like, I got the green light, guys. That's all I'm saying. And it's ironic that the
Yeah.
Kickstarter logo is green. So I feel like, it kind of, again, it's kind of serendipitous, but it's just really cool. I liked all the concepts that you guys had, in just terms of just overall design, the coloring, even like just the pattern, that goes around the image to me just, evokes that type of feeling. Um, and I don't know, I just feel like it really, really matches your guys' theme really well. And I think it does a lot of the selling for you personally when, you see the cover. So and again, I haven't seen too many anthologies do that. I had seen one that my friend did recently, and that was one of the things that he did not like was the cover. And he kind of kept getting out, got outvoted, and he's like, was telling me, I think I'm gonna pull my story, but he was already ready to go. And I'm like, well, where do you, what do you, are you gonna do anything else with it or whatever? He's like, probably not. I was like, you might as well just do it, and yeah, so I think it worked out a little bit better than he thought. But again, he wasn't happy with it. So I don't know. I think it's really cool, and yeah, I haven't seen too many anthology covers look that good. So I think you guys did a really good job with that one.
Yeah, thanks.
In terms, and you said like in terms of the Kickstarter, um, so why did you guys decide to do 2 different versions of the cover? I'm just curious.
Because we're gluttons for punishment. No, I
What I
mean,
was thinking, but
we kind of toyed around with different ideas of what could we do that was special for Kickstarter
yeah,
backers, because we knew we wanted to put this out on Kickstarter so that we could make it the best quality product that we could. And we kind of went through various ideas of doing like hardback versions or doing like a foiled version. And in the end, we decided that what we'd do is just do 2, not completely, but kind of very different covers, just so that we had so many backers. That's the entire number of these purple versions that are going to go out, so people know that no one else is going to get that. And I think that really helped people to feel like they were getting something special.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, well, I just was curious because it seems to be an ongoing question that people keep asking me. I've been talking that with my team as well. In terms of like, should we, for a particular project of mine, should we just open it up to Kickstarter? And my biggest thing is I'm like, well, what are we going to offer people? Like, are people really gonna, come after that reward? And for me, that just keeps coming up in my own conversations, as an author. And then I have other people, with their products. I had a couple of comic book writers and artists I talked to recently, who've talked about the same thing. So I think it's always one of the hardest things, to really answer in terms of a Kickstarter. It's like, what are we providing? And are we providing something in a creative fashion? If it's not an extra, like a different paperback cover or something like that, or hardcover. I'm not a big hardcover guy, so I gotta say, you guys doing a paperback like that, particularly with the cool color scheme that's purple and different, to me that's a little bit more attractive to me personally. I know some people really enjoy hardcovers. I'm just sorry if I'm ostracizing like 90% of the audience. I'm just not much of a hardcover guy. I just used to paperbacks. I like the way they look and feel. So for me, I'm your audience. You know what I mean? Like, you guys are people I know. You're people I like, people I like to read. So I like the paperback. And I like the overall design. I like that it looks a little different and has a cool, different color. So I feel like I'm exactly your guys' type of audience there. So I just want to point that out to our audience, that sometimes you're like, oh, I don't know if this is going to work. Like, you really don't know until you try and put it in those rewards, or try and put it as part of your plan. So, and you never really know with some of those rewards, what's really, what people really want until you ask, I think. So I think that was really smart. And then
There's
in
one more
terms,
neat Kickstarter fact. One thing I really
even
liked
better.
that we did was the book plate. And I think Holly will agree, that was a huge stressor. We sent
Yeah.
these things around the world, and there were some nervous moments like, did the package get lost? Is it insured? Does it have a signature on the package? But there's book plate versions of this book sitting there for the Kickstarter group that have everybody's signature. And that was not an easy feat. There's a lot of
Yeah, yeah.
countries covered.
I actually have.
I was
This
gonna
one is
say, you
actually
guys
a
are in a
book
lot of
like
time zones.
signed
Yeah.
one. So
Oh, that's cool. That, I never thought of that. That does get really hard with an anthology. I mean, like,
Yeah.
I don't know why I was just thinking for co-authors, because talked privately with two co-authors that are coming on soon about that, you know, and about them doing that on the Kickstarter. And they live in one's in India and the other one's in California over here. So I'm like, how do you guys do that? You know, but they said they've been, you know, paying quite a bit for postage and trying to get it figured out. So I never even considered that for you guys. So yeah, you guys have people really like all over. So yeah, that makes total sense. That's an interesting like, you know, thing to you know, to bring up, you know, is you know, when you're doing an anthology, because some people might never think of that, you know, for the Kickstarter, you know, in terms of, you know, doing that. So I think that's a really cool thing to offer. But yeah, you probably got to really pre-plan that. Mark Timony and I talked about doing a couple of things, but he's in Australia, and just to get a bookmark from him that I paid for a Kickstarter was really difficult because my mail had screwed it up. They sent it all the way back to him after like a month, and then he was like, "Oh my gosh!" He tried sending it to me. They sent it back to him over there. I don't know. It was like it was crazy, you know. So I can only imagine if just him and me were trying to get book plates, you know, going back and forth, just to try and, you know, fulfill a Kickstarter. So yeah, I think that one is that's a good one to bring up there, Brian. In terms of your guys' like blurb and like overview, I was just curious at how you guys came up with that. If that was still, you know, like those type of decisions, was that still just like a group chat thing, or Holly, was that more of like you kind of gave a directive? I was just curious at what that process was like for you guys.
So for the blurb, I worked quite closely with Sarah Chorn, who did our editing for us, because at that point, although I'd read most of the stories, I still hadn't actually had the time to read all of them. So she was like a really good point of reference to kind of work out what needed to go in the blurb and on the back of the book to really kind of encapsulate everybody. So I did a brief like write up. I sent it to Sarah. She added some bits in and kind of tweaked it, and then I put it in the group chat, and kind of everyone just kind of piled on and had their like say and their opinions, and kind of between the group we kind of then came up with the end product, which went on the back.
That's cool. I think Sarah needs to come on to the show because her name has been mentioned so many times in the last like 4 out of 5 episodes that I filmed. So Sarah, if you are watching or hearing this, I will send you another invite really soon. She was one too that like it just hasn't happened. It was like when she wasn't busy, I was like slammed. And then all of a sudden, you know, she gets slammed because everybody's using her for good reason. But you know, it's
It's
been
probably our
making it hard for
fault.
them.
She's probably doing this.
She probably is. You and our last 4 guests. So I can only imagine. And I definitely don't, you know, don't blame her, you know, like for, you know, people just her and Felix both are just like, you know, Sean PK just like slammed right now. Like I said, for good reason. But I'd love to pick her brain at some point too of Honey and Wildflowers is I'm about to finish that one up really soon. So I can't wait. But it's just I think it's funny, like her name's been mentioned like so many times recently. So people are gonna think we have like a common theme here, which is kind of Sarah. She's our anthology, I guess you could say. I was curious for both of you, like Holly, you know, like in terms of your normal, you know, just like, you know, your books, you know, an anthology story is a lot different. So I was just curious that, you know, I find it hard to write an anthology story. I just got to be honest. Like mine, I pulled because I was like, this is a novella. And I was like, no, it's a novella series. You know what I mean? And then I was like, well, I'll do a Kindle novella series. I find it hard because I'm so used to writing, you know, a little bit longer. So I was just curious for both of you, you know, like compared to what you know, you normally write, you know, did you find writing a shorter anthology story a lot, you know, a lot more difficult, or was it kind of easy because it was a different medium? I was just, you know, curious from that kind of perspective, that like kind of how that went for you guys.
Go on, Brian.
I'll go first. So for me, I was really gung ho because I actually am not that big of a fantasy author, but this whole group is like a bunch of fantasy superstars. I
Yeah.
wrote a young adult coming of age, followed by a scary kind of futurism book. And so this was a stretch, but I pitched P.L. Stewart on a future book I'm working on. And he was like, hey, that's interesting. And I think you'd be a good fit on this project. And so it was a way for me to cut some fantasy chops a little and get into a new genre, which I was really excited to do because it was the first time I had tried to write fantasy. And I think I pulled off a pretty interesting, it's a hybrid realism story. So like it's not
Oh,
true
cool.
fantasy like some of the other authors, but by getting so many different cooks in the kitchen, you get that variety. So like
Yeah.
I've gone for realism, but that doesn't mean it's gonna not work as fantasy because there's so many hard fantasy stories that maybe that realism fantasy will actually work against those, contrasting them. So
Yeah.
yeah.
that's such an interesting just like take, and like I like that. I have not considered doing that. There are a couple of genres that, I'd like to start working on besides fantasy and urban fantasy. So I actually think that's a really good idea. Is go instead of doing a whole book and this that, just trying anthologies. First of all, just to see if I like it, and then to kind of work on those things, and to obviously, right, like you said, you have a lot of people who are big in the fantasy industry here. So learning from those people, I actually think that's a really good idea. I'm gonna have to start picking your brain more, Brian, because you're doing some things that I feel like I need to copy here that are really good. So I think that is really, really smart. So I think I'll have to do it. I've been thinking like thrillers too. I like thrillers. I'd like to add more of a thriller aspect to some of my fantasy and urban fantasy. Mystery, same thing. I like mysteries, and I'd like to kind of blend those genres together. So I think I've been trying to figure out how I could learn from those people. So I think, maybe trying to get into some anthologies for them would be a really good idea, and, a good way to accumulate those skills. So I see you, Brian. That's a really smart one. How about you, Holly? You made him go first, so
I did, yeah. I actually just want to add on to that as well, because with Brian mentioning, being surrounded by all these kind of big fantasy authors, when we initially, me and PL started putting this list of authors together, what we said from the outset was that we really wanted to bring in some different voices to the kind of, not that we didn't want it to be fantasy, we wanted fantasy elements there, but we really wanted to make sure that we'd got a kind of diverse cross section. So we had like, BjØrn Larssen came on board, who does write fantasy, but it's a very different kind of fantasy. It's a very kind of surrealist, psychological based fantasy. PL kind of said, oh, I know this BA Bellec who's done this book called Pulse. I want to say that right. And we wanted someone that could come in and maybe do something a bit more contemporary and like a little bit more real world. Same with Zamil Akhtar, who does like the cosmic horror. We wanted to make sure we had a lot of voices in there. So, it is fantasy, but it is lots of other things as well. So I just want to say that bit.
oh, that's fine.
In terms of my story, I actually had already written the story prior to the project starting. I'd written it to pitch out to a couple of magazines and things, and I kind of got to the point where I was happy with it. But then this project came along, and I thought, actually, do you know what? Now I've changed it and spent this much time on it. I'm going to use it for this. So I kind of cheated a little bit.
The
But
truth
yeah,
comes out, Brian. The truth comes out.
it is. The truth is coming out now. But short stories I do find really difficult, because I always think if I'm going to write a short story, it'll end up being like 30,000-40,000 words and be too long. But if I try to write a novel, I'll get to about 10,000 words and then run out of ideas. So clearly it's like a reverse psychology thing going on.
That's so true. Maybe I should try that for short stories. I'll be like, this is gonna be a book, and then right when I get tapered off, I can figure out how to just finish it and kind of go from there. So I think that that's really smart. Um, but yeah, I was just curious with that question, because like I said, I've really struggled when they decided they were gonna do Kindle Vella, and I found out what it was. I was like, this is genius for me, because I could just kind of keep going. And I love I love anthologies. I love I'm actually going to do my own for Kindle Vella, like once I'm done and the rights revert back. Once my seasons are done, I'm going to do my own anthologies. So that's why I was so interested in how you guys were doing things. And I've talked to Scott Oden, and some other people about doing maybe some interesting things in the future. I'm a huge Conan fan. So yeah, but I always find it interesting when people that just do such a good job with short stories. I'm like, that's just not my cup of tea. So, but I did have a friend a while back who, he just was like, I just decided I need to get better at this medium, and I learned a lot, and he just joined a bunch of anthologies and just kind of went from there. Kind of did what you did, Brian. Just kind of learn from different people and that kind of thing. But yeah, I was just curious from that perspective, because I think some people don't really think about, they think like, oh, I'm just going to write a short story and send it in, but I don't really think they understand what an anthology really means, in terms of working with other people, trying to get that common theme, and trying, but still, like you said, Holly, like trying to get a unique aspect, right? Because it's a really hard line to follow, right? Where like you each have your body part, your own story, but you still have to follow that common theme. So I just think that that ends up being really difficult for some people, And again, I think it goes back to, the type of team that, you guys are able to put together, and things like that. What would you guys say was like your own successful triumph, or something that you like were really trying to do, and learn, maybe Brian, from like this anthology, and that you were like, man, this worked so well. I'm so glad I did this. Like, I was just curious, what was the thing? Maybe it was finishing, right? But like, what was the thing that made you just like so happy that you were a part of this project?
I'll say for sure it was working with the group. My favorite part was the beta and then the editing for sure. I loved all of that collaboration, which is not something you get a lot as a writer. I've written
Yeah.
3 books, and it was basically me in my office for 500 hours. So it's really fun though to share stories that are 80% done, 70% done, and get those notes and then do the edit and then share them again. And that was just, to me, that was the highlight of the project that I just love being a part of. And I really will take that, those early feedback moments will be with me for my whole career. Because I
Awesome.
love that, and it was a
Yeah.
success in that I shared the feedback and I got feedback.
Cool. So you almost got like a writing group perspective from doing the anthology, which is really cool. And again, I don't think a lot of people do. I think, like, just want to mention to our audience is like, you'll find some groups, right, where you just email, and maybe Holly will just, be the lead, and just her and the editor, right, might be the only ones that are reading and giving feedback. But some other people do like what you guys did, and I just feel like Lee, like I said, Lee was like, oh yeah, this was great, blah blah. So I just find that funny, that I just think again, I think it really comes down to, what group you're with, and how, that group is being ran, and how, like you said, Brian, like how that feedback's being shared, and really, ultimately determines, like really what you get out of it. But what do you think, Holly? What was your one thing?
Um, I would think it's kind of two things for me. So I really
Oh,
enjoyed
perfect.
the process of so every time we got something new, so like every time we got like a new author illustration, or like the bookmarks came in, so we could kind of share it on the group, and it was really nice to like just feel like that was a moment for all of us to share. So it wasn't just me like emailing, Tim Hardie and saying, "Oh, here's your picture." It was there for everyone. Um, but I think second to that, what I enjoyed the most out of it was getting to see like the different elements and skills that different people brought that I didn't realize were there. So for example, like C Conley, he did all of our formatting and our kind of graphic work for us to get everything looking good in the book.
Yeah.
Tim Hardie and Jacob Sannox, they came on as production team with me, and they really kind of single-handedly got out all the Kickstarter rewards between them, which was amazing for me because I didn't have to do anything. And then just even little things that I didn't know about people. So like obviously getting to meet Brian through this, I've learned about his music that he does. So he's done, he's been sending me songs back and forth. We've got some kind of, I don't want to give too much away, but there's some musical stuff going on as well. And
Oh,
I would
cool.
never have known that if we hadn't had this group. So that
Yeah.
was really cool part of it.
Oh, that's really cool. If any of my students are watching, this is what I'm talking about when I say you have to work with other people. This is cultural diffusion in a nutshell. So just saying. A bunch of them recently in my new school, they're like, we were listening to your podcast, we're watching, blah blah. I was like, oh cool, I'm going to teach you stuff through it. Like, be on the lookout. But I think, Holly, you make such a good point though, and I just like that, and I just didn't consider that, so we talk about it here. I'm at like an interesting program now where it's like a technological school, so I teach social studies, but I'm also teaching technology that I love. One reason I got hired was podcasting, and I bring something, unique skills to the table, that maybe other people don't have that expertise on. So I think that that's really smart, of you. So like if we were in, the anthology group together, you'd be like, oh, well, Dan can do this, or put the videos together, advertisements, things like that. So I just think that's really smart, to actually not just use people's, writing ability, but also, the copy editing, and things like that. So, just using, really like everybody's full skills depending on, where their talents, I think makes a lot of sense and is really smart. So I think that is something that Brian will take with him to his next anthology, which is really cool. And you guys both mentioned a little bit of the beta process, but I was just curious because to me that's a really interesting one because, like I said, I know a lot of people have set up their processes a lot different. So I was just curious how you guys set up your beta reading processes in terms of your group and kind of like, how many people had which story, if you guys read all the stories. I was just curious how you guys divided that work up and kind of what that process was like with checking in with each other.
So it was, I mean, it was easy because we had 12 authors, so it kind of
Yeah.
worked out really nicely having that number. So we divided ourselves into 3 groups of 4. So I think the group I was in, it was myself, Brian, Tim, and is it Lee, I think, was in our group. I honestly can't remember now, but everyone kind of split off into their groups, and there was an agreement that everyone would read every story in their group as a minimum, but obviously then it was open for people to read whatever other stories that they wanted. So for me, I think quite quickly I read through the 3 in my group, and then we would have like individual conversations and kind of do little markups on each other, and I think it was all very kind of open back and forth. So yeah, I mean, I found the process really, really useful.
Cool. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It was the same. I didn't know how the groups were divided, so I don't know if that was random, Holly, or if there was some strategic decision making there. But
Totally random.
it was totally random. Okay. But it worked out in that I felt like the group I was in, the people that were giving me feedback were different than me, which is, I didn't want to get, somebody who was writing body horror giving me feedback. I wanted somebody who writes high fantasy to give me feedback because that's a totally different viewpoint. Right. So that's what I was actually looking for in the group is like, what do I not do well? Can you give me notes? Yeah.
Yeah, you actually make a really good point there. Yeah, I didn't consider that. I actually think I would have enjoyed the 2 groups I was a part of more if we had done that. Because if I'm going to do something, I have kids all the time ask me like, well, why aren't you doing this? Or why are you doing a Kindle Bella series? I'm like, well, I have a small child now, and I'm like, I have to really, think about my time management, biggest bang for my buck, and kind of go from there. So I think if somebody in the future was to set up an anthology that way where I could learn from you or Holly, and really not just get the overall story or be part of the anthology, but really learn maybe some more things for craft, right? Or work on shore up some of my weaknesses, so to speak, and kind of have some of my strengths pointed out from somebody from who's different from me, like you said, Brian. I think that is really smart and would make a lot more sense and kind of make me feel better about spending time on a particular project. But I think that's really cool.
Can
I
I
was
just
curious
add a
what.
little?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So it's just because I think this is a cool thing to point out for people who are doing similar projects is I think because we'd taken the time to set up the group and talk amongst ourselves and chat first, we'd kind of we'd got like a basic trust level between all of the authors. And I
Good
think
point.
that's really important for beta groups is that you need to have not only the trust that someone will give you constructive criticism, but also that they want you to come up with the best story that you can and that everybody is driving towards that same goal. And I think we were really fortunate that we had that. So I think that's something that it's a really big part of getting the best out of that setup.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I just wanted to point out, I know I asked this previously, but just ruminating with this, with you saying that, I think that, just saying, and I saw a couple groups do this right after the pandemic with the anthology, where some people just stuck with the same group, for several anthologies, just because that first time, the trust was there and it was deepened. But then that second and third anthology, man, I had a couple where I was like, these are just amazing, and I noticed that it was the same group, over and over again. Maybe 1 or 2 authors changed or something like that, but that core group was there. So I do think you're right there, Holly. And I just do think maybe it'd be interesting if you guys decide to do it later. Again, it'd be interesting, I really think, to see, that growth between the first anthology, and the second anthology, because I think maybe some people, be even more willing, right, to do something a little different or to take some more risks, just because, you guys have already built up that trust. It'd be interesting to see if some of you guys possibly, co-author some things later, or because of that trust. Like I always say, this is kind of like a live journal. Like I'm talking to people trying to learn, but I also think it'd be interesting to see now, what some of you, like what Brian does, with his fantasy, or what someone does with horror, or whatever. People always forget that we talk about horror around here all the time, and I didn't put it in the name because I consider it part of fantasy, and a lot of times sci-fi, and it's a shorter for t-shirts and things. But I think it'd be cool, just to kind of see where all of you guys go from here, based off of your guys' experience. But I think you make a really good point about trust, and I do a lot of reflection, and I'm not necessarily saying that, the two groups I was part of, it was really other people. I think I just wasn't ready, probably myself to trust. So I think that's another thing too, I'm just saying to the audience, if you're thinking about being part of an anthology, like Brian, you just kind of went charge forward. I think you really have to have that type of mentality and be like, hey, this is going to be an experience I learned from, and I'm going to try and learn as much as I can from these people who I always assume other people, know more than me. And that way I learn a lot more from it. So I think, Holly, that's a absolutely great point to make. I was curious, especially for this question, in terms of what's like one thing you're both going to take with you in terms of your own individual writing after this project and working with such a great team.
Oh,
I know it's a hard one. It's like
that is a
picking
hard
like
one.
favorite child.
Yeah. I mean,
Or it could be a couple things. I don't want to limit you, sorry.
I think the main thing that I'm going to take away in terms of my own writing is that from now on, I'm going to get C Conley to format all my books for me because he's much better at it than I am. I don't know. I think I probably learnt more about the putting together of a book. Not that I didn't learn things about my own writing, but I think I've been so absorbed in the production side of it, I haven't really had chance to reflect on it. But yeah, I mean, I think I'll probably take away some of the approaches that people have made with this. So just the being willing to get out of your comfort zone, and do something different. And, LL MacRae is like the perfect example of this because she, at the beginning of this project, was so convinced that she couldn't write horror and that, this wasn't the right project for her. And her story just literally is amazing. And I think, just to have that kind of confidence just to do something a little bit out of your wheelhouse can be a really good, healthy thing to do as a writer.
I think that makes total sense. I'm shaking my head here because I'm thinking of, like, especially her book one, there's just certain elements of horror that I think she did so well, with book one, with her fantasy. I think that's interesting. But I think that's a great point though, is I think we all as authors and writers, and creatives have, certain, I'm always worried about my dialogue. I know it's always been I could describe, I could narrate, it's always been one of my weakest things. So I think that makes total sense. And like I said, like I was saying, with Brian was like, oh, I joined this anthology for this reason and to learn. And I think, that if I was going into a thriller or a mystery anthology, I feel like I would have a lot of those, things too, because I normally write sci-fi, fantasy. Fantasy comes really easy to me. Sci-fi is harder, but those other ones I think are a lot harder for me. So yeah, I think, yeah, like putting yourself out there and, doing your best and learning from that is a good one. But yeah, I'm really interested in reading her story now. I'm interested in reading all of them, but that's an interesting like little like side note. So can't wait to read hers and give her some awesome feedback there. What do you think, Brian? What's like, and I don't want to limit you. Sorry, I'm just so used to at school trying to give kids, parameters. But what are some things that, that then I think, Holly, you made a good point, like it might not just be with your writing, it might just be overall, right? Because there's so many things we have to do as authors now, whether whether you're self-published or traditionally published, there's just, you have to do so much. So what do you think, Brian? What are some things that you'll take with you, either the writing process or maybe the overall production process?
You mentioned dialogue, and actually another obstacle in my getting into the group was that I actually write with screenplay style writing. So if you go read my first three novels, they don't have traditional dialogue tags. They look more like a screenplay, which is great for an indie that's self-published, not great in a group setting. So a big learning experience for me was trying to write like normal prose and just tag my dialogue so it looks right in the book. And I hope that if you didn't know anything about me and you read my story, you wouldn't know that I only had written screenplay styling before this. So that's my takeaway for sure.
No, that's a good one. And now you have me really interested in your other stuff because I just love when someone does something new or in a different way. And so, and I love screenplays. That's how I actually got into stuff, was writing screenplays. So to me, that sounds really cool. So I'm actually really interested to see, your before and after, so to speak, like your own stuff and this anthology, just to kind of maybe I can tell a difference, maybe I can't, So I think that that's a really good answer. We're kind of wrapping up on time here, so I just want to make sure we have time for the actual, like promoting and things like that. So, in terms of where we can find the anthology, I know Holly, you sent me the pre-order link, and then probably by this time it'll be released, I would assume, or pretty close. So, I just want to talk a little bit about the release date and where people can find your guys' anthologies, just to make sure we got enough time to be really clear about all that information.
Yep, so the go live date for the general release is the 16th of November. So it is on pre-order up until then. Once it goes live, it will be on Amazon. You'll also be able to find it through most of the individual authors' websites. I say most because I haven't put it on mine yet, because I just haven't had time. It's up on Goodreads as well, so people can find it on there. And we also have the audiobook is in production at the moment, so that's going to be released shortly after the ebook and the paperback is, and that's going to be on Audible and Spotify and iTunes and all the normal places that you can get audiobooks.
Well, that's awesome. Please make sure you send all that to me, and I will actually amend the description, even if this goes out before then. And then send that all to me, and I'll post all that everywhere for you guys. And then anybody's website, where it can be found, I'll post to Amazon. So, people who have been with the podcast for a while, you know exactly where to go, right? You go right down to the description. If you are new to this podcast in any format or YouTube, you go right down to our description. You can find everybody's sites there, their individual author ones. You can also find anywhere where their Anthology of Fear can be found. And you guys can also go to our new website as well. You'll see a blog post there, just talking about the different authors, this interview, just their anthology, just in general. And if you guys have any questions, let me know, and I can pass them on to Brian, Hallie, or any of the other authors. And don't forget, you can also join our podcast Facebook group as well, here in the description, so that way you can talk to authors in real time and get their updates whenever they update in the Facebook group. Anything else that you guys want to share, Brian or Holly, at all? Anything that we might have missed?
Just to say that if anybody is admiring this beautiful t-shirt, they are available on Redbubble.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, that's super cool. Well, I want to thank you again, Holly, for reaching out. This was really fun. Like I said, anytime I can get multiple authors that have worked on the same project, and it was just so cool to be able to talk to you guys, about anthologies. I don't want to say it when we first started, but I feel like you guys kind of sold me on, trying to work on them again in the future. It's just nice to know, when people have worked together really well. It makes me feel like I just need to find the right group. So that really made me feel better. So I do know some people, like I said, who had questions, and I keep trying to direct them towards different resources or groups, or people asking for anthologies. So again, I really thank you guys so much for coming on and sharing your experiences, particularly the positive ones. But if there's anything else I can do, before your guys' anthology, comes out, when this episode releases, and I'll send you guys the date later today, or even after, just let me know. And, I'd love to help you guys out in any way. If you guys want to come back individually at all, Holly, right, alumni, Brian, feel free to hit me up, and we will figure something out for you guys for our schedule for the future. But other than that, if there's anything I can do, just let me know.
That's awesome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, anytime, anytime. Thank you so much. You two have a great rest of the day, and I'll do my best to get the word out for you guys, constantly post, and I'll help you guys in any way that I can, get my own copy really soon. So thank you so much.
See you
You guys
later.
have a good one. Bye.